Hi everyone, welcome to the January 28th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona, here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski, and this week we're looking ahead to Pegasus World Cup Saturday at Gulfstream Park. It's an exciting weekend in horse racing with that big race taking place in Florida on Saturday. That anticipated matchup between the Breeders' Cup Classic winner Nick Sco and Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile winner Life is Good. Obviously that being the feature race on Saturday. Very interesting to see how that's going to play out on the racetrack. We'll talk about that in great depth later in the show, but a lot to get to before that as we're going to discuss the entire late pick 5 sequence at Gulfstream Park. All stakes as part of that sequence, the inside information, Pegasus World Cup Filly and Mare Turf, the Fred W. Hooper, the Pegasus World Cup Turf, and that big race at the end of the day, race 12, the Pegasus World Cup. So, Craig, a lot to look forward to on this card, and we've got some help to talk about it this week.
Yeah, it's a fun card. I'm looking forward to the big race. I'm not sure, some people might view it as a race that's not really a great betting opportunity, but I think I may play it vertically as well as in the pick 5. But some interesting races throughout the card. There's some on the card I wish were in this pick 5 as opposed to a couple of the others, but a good solid day of racing. And I've invited my friend who I have never actually met in person yet. Hopefully going to remedy that on Florida Derby Day if he can make it to Gulfstream, because me and my wife will be heading there. But we've talked a lot offline. We met on Twitter. I text him sometimes just to bug him. But I will be honest, I don't know a lot about Barry's handicapping style, so I'm looking forward to diving in. And with that, I'll introduce our guest, Barry Spears.
Hi, hey, how you going? How's it going, guys? Yeah, I'm definitely going to be at the Florida Derby, so you can count on that. We're going to meet up then. But yeah, I mean, I've been playing the races for a long time, longer than I want to tell people sometimes. But I started out at 8 years old. I figured out how to read the racing form at Saratoga. I played the races, sparingly. I read every book I could on the subject, and I kind of just honed my craft over the years. I played tournaments a lot back in the probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and I stopped doing that. But it really elevated my game playing in tournaments and especially putting together pick 4s, pick 5s, things like that, and finding price horses. So, as far as my handicapping style per se, I like to find the chaotic races and just pound those whenever I can beat favorites. That's really my thing. Is just no chalk zone is my philosophy.
All right, we're similar in that regard, and I know from listening to your podcast, which you can tell us more about here after I'm done, but I kind of knew the chaos theory thing with you, because one of the things I picked up is you may be the only person in America who seems to like the synthetic races at Gulfstream Park.
Yeah, it's funny because they're cheap races, most of them, and the synthetic doesn't really have any kind of history there. So it yields a lot of, crazy kind of results, and that's what I look for, especially when you're playing in a multi-race bet situation where you need to separate yourself from the crowd in order to make that money. So, those kind of races are good for that. I mean, it's been okay as far as the prices go. Not many favorites, things that get a little out of hand, but that's what I like.
Yeah, that's a really good point. As horse players, that's something we should be looking for, races that pay. Horse players can kind of get set in their ways at times, I think. For the most part, we're an older crowd. And, like there was some talk about the new shoot at Saratoga. The first thing I did was, man, I want to dive in and see how those races are going to play. Some people were already moaning and groaning about them. But yeah, let's look at it as an opportunity. But unfortunately, we don't have any of those synthetic races because they're all stakes races. And yeah, I guess we should go ahead and dive into the card. David, where'd you want to start? Oh, well, whoa, I'm sorry. Before we do that, Barry, tell us about your podcast, which I am an avid listener.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on the podcast at Going in Circles podcast with Chuck Simon. We do the Big Monday show every Monday. And we just kind of started it one day. We were just talking, and he's like, maybe we should do a podcast. Chuck opened his iPad, and he's like, yeah, we're going to do it every Monday. And I was like, okay. And, we just like to take a kind of behind the curtain look at everything, and we want to be as real as possible in this industry, and try to get things fixed and be positive, and try to get our opinions and thoughts out there, and may hopefully we can make a change at some point.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of you and Chuck. Barry, you're a great follow on Twitter as well. You're not afraid to speak your mind. You have a fresh take on things from the horse races to the racing industry. So I really appreciate having your voice be part of the conversation. And I'm excited to get your handicapping take on these races because, I'm very used to handicapping races with Craig. I feel like sometimes we do it so often that I can almost predict where Craig's going to go sometimes. So it's going to be refreshing to have a new take, a new voice on this podcast. So looking forward to diving into these races. And with that, let's get right into this Pick 5 sequence and begin with Race 8, the Grade 2 Inside Information, going 7 furlongs for the fillies and mares on the main track. And Barry, since you're the guest, let's start with you. This seems like a pretty wide open race. The morning lines kind of spread all over the place. We've got a bunch of speed signed on, so I think trips are going to be of utmost importance. Where were you looking to go in this one?
I really kind of honed in on number 5, Four Graces. I think she was a really prepared for this next race here on Saturday. That race she had on January 6th, the optional claimer 62,000. She really kind of switched leads late in the stretch and ran on really well to stay in front of the third place finisher there. She's got 4 wins at the distance, which is kind of tricky. 7 furlongs isn't, like it's obviously between 6 furlongs and a mile, but horses tend to kind of not do so well. But she's very consistent, and I think that sets her up. That last race on January 6th sets her up really, really nicely for Saturday, and she's kind of the one I'm kind of zeroed in on.
Yeah, Craig, Four Graces is a horse that I do want to get your take on because she has earned some gigantic TimeformUS speed figures in the past, but mostly when she was a 3-year-old, and seems like she's had a lot of layoffs since then. Maybe they've struggled to get her back into that form, but it has to be a good sign that she's now putting races back to back, having had that prep last time, because if she runs back to her top speed figures, she's a major player in this race. I just think it has to be a big if at this point in her career.
Yeah, she's a horse I'm going to use in the Pick 5, but I do have questions about her. You mentioned those couple 120 TimeformUS speed figures she ran. As you said, they were a long time ago, and she hasn't really shown that. She hasn't been able to stay on the racetrack, but I'm kind of on Barry's side with this one, where I think her return was probably useful. I seriously doubt they were trying to win that race, even though she was 6-5. It wasn't a strong field, and I kind of liked how she finished it off. So for a field of 10, I don't think this is the strongest grade 2 you're ever going to see, and I think she's a contender that you have to use. I think there's some other interesting horses to talk about in here. One of them is a new arrival in the Todd Pletcher barn, and that's AG Indy. And you won't often see horses that are shown on the front of the pace projector when they're basically strictly turf runners moving over to the dirt. But she's been running pretty quick, but this isn't Todd Pletcher's forte, so this is one that I'm going to let beat me. I should also mention this is a race the pace projector has, with the pace being pretty quick. We have it in red. There's a few horses bunched up near the front, including AG Indy, including Four Graces, and also another horse that I think you have to discuss. That's Just One Time, who's a new arrival in the Brad Cox barn. It looks like a private sale, a Pennsylvania bred, who's kind of been beating up on horses at Penn mostly. Did ship the PID. I always call it the PID. Presque Isle Downs, and won a race. So I think there's some different directions to go, but unfortunately, I'm going to guess that you and I landed on the same horse in here, David, because as you say, we kind of get to know each other, and that's Pacific Gale. She's a horse who I really think has some dirtied up form in here. She's always run well at Gulfstream. She kind of had a resurgence when I had written her off and won some nice races there. And I think her form's, just as I said, it's a bit hidden. Her last race she ran on turf. I think you can put a line through that. The one before that at Gulfstream, or the one before that against Chubwagon at Parks, there was absolutely no pace in the race. Chubwagon is really good. She's a very good filly who's just a win machine, and when you give her a head start like she had that day in a slow pace, you're never going to beat her. Before that, I think she was a little too aggressively ridden in the Princess Rooney, but I just think she makes a lot of sense in here. So it's a race I'm going to spread. I'm going to use Pacific Gale as an A. I'm going to use 4 Graces. I'll probably use just one time. And the one other horse I wanted to talk about was Jakarta. She's a horse who moved to the Michael Trombetta barn last time out, and he seemed to figure her out. She had kind of been wallowing on the turf. She's a horse who had success on dirt and turf in the past, but I've always thought she was a little bit better on dirt. I'm not sure why Mike Maker just kept running her on turf over and over again. She ran a really nice 119 speed figure. So she's one I am going to use, but I do have some trepidation because Michael Trombetta, he just does not do very well at Gulfstream in these situations.
Yeah, Craig, you got this one pegged right for me. I do like Pacific Gale in this race, for all the reasons that you mentioned. I don't have to rehash it. I think you made all of the major points with her. And furthermore, I mean, it's hard to find a horse in this race that can come from off the pace and take advantage of what I do think is going to be an honest clip up front. So she seems like one of the few that has been successful passing horses and could make a bid from mid-pack. But Barry, I do want to get your take on one of the horses that Craig mentioned, that Brad Cox trainer switch, the number 8, just one time. She's listed as the slight favorite on the morning line, I think at 3-1, and feels like a kind of horse that you do have to have an opinion about handicapping this race. And with her going into the Brad Cox barn, it seems like she does have to take a lot of money.
Yeah, definitely. You know, the connections alone are just going to attract so much money that I think this horse is actually going to be below 3-1, probably more 5-2 ish. But that being said, you know, it's a tough read because, you know, it's hard to tell what she was running against or if she's just that good. And this is a true test. I don't really like horses like this, but in a race like this, like Craig was saying, it's not very, very strong as a grade 2. You kind of have to include her. I also will include Pacific Gale, and my notes on her in this race are actually that this race is eerily similar to the one that she won last year. The field isn't all that great. There's a lot of pace up front, and this is it's a real good setup for her race shape wise.
Yeah, I think we mentioned all the major contenders there, and we all gave a pretty decent endorsement to Pacific Gale, so maybe she's got a little too much weight on her shoulders. We'll see about that. But let's move on to race 9, the second leg of this pick 5 sequence. This is the Pegasus World Cup filly and mare turf, a new event that they've pegged as a grade 3, going 1 mile and a 16th on the turf. Got 11 horses signed on for this race, Craig, and it seems like Regal Glory is just simply the class of this field. She's got some proven grade 1 form in her recent starts, and feels like Chad Brown has found a pretty good spot for her to stretch out to the mile and a 16th after concentrating on those 1 mile races recently. She's the one that you do have to get around. Did you see this as just Regal Glory, Craig, or is this one where you're looking to spread a little more?
No, I'm going to spread a little more. I mean, I think she's good. Obviously, she's super consistent. She's run, I mean, going back as far as you want to scroll almost in the TimeformUS PP, she always runs the same race right around the 120 mark. Give or take a point or two. So you almost know she's going to show up. She's versatile. So, I mean, I think you have to use her. She will definitely be an A on my tickets, but I'm not going to just hand the race to her. I think there are a couple others in here that could give her some trouble. And the first one I'm going to start with is a horse that just always seems to get overlooked for some reason, and I can't figure it out. She didn't get overlooked last time in a weak field, but she is a win machine, and she always seems to pay a decent price. And that's the 8-horse Summer in Saratoga. She's a horse, when you look through, the losses are just few and far between. One of her losses came at Kentucky Downs, that kind of odd track that I don't usually hold against horses when they don't run well. Another came on dirt. Another time she lost a rider. But outside of that, she just keeps winning her races. And I think she's going to get a decent setup in here. The TimeformUS pace projector has it as a fast pace. There is some speed in here with Shifty She drawn to the outside, Lady Spade Spear drawn toward the inside. So I do think there's going to be some pace. So I definitely will include Regal Glory, but I'm going to make Summer and Saratoga an A as well.
Barry, how are you looking at this one?
Yeah, this is a really strange race, top to bottom, because there's a lot going on here, especially the horses coming out of the Swanee River. I really had a hard time trying to make sense of that race because it was just run so strangely, where Shifty She just went out there winging it and got caught, and then Sweet Melania looked like she had the best setup in the world and only beat her by a half length. And it was like, well, why didn't Sweet Melania just blow by that horse and run off? Um, and my instinct is telling me that to just toss both of those horses, but I really can't. Um, but I may end up doing that just for price sake, especially going forward. The horse that really kind of caught my eye was Lady Spitespear. I think that was a really useful effort the last time, even though she kind of ran all over the place in the stretch. Looked like she had some problems, but if you go back to our previous races, I mean, she's been pretty professional, and also doesn't actually need the lead, I don't believe, especially in a spot like this where Shifty She's going to go out, and there's a chance that Sweet Melania might even want to go out there a little bit in front of her, so she might get a more favorable pace scenario this time. And then obviously another horse that kind of on equal plane with that is Giftless, who I think has run races that are great every time, even though the numbers might not say so. And then she had a nice work on the 14th of January that really piqued my interest, showing that she's probably in good form coming into this. So I'm kind of excited about that one.
Yeah, we had the same take on the Swanee River. When I was watching that race, it looked like Sweet Melania was going to take over and draw off to win by 3 lengths or so, and she just got to that last furlong, and she kind of hung a little bit. I don't know if she got tired or if what seemed like the honest pace that Shifty She was setting maybe took its toll. We don't really know what the pace for that race was because there are no fractions. They are having some trouble timing those races at Gulfstream Park, but it did visually seem like Sweet Melania was supposed to have a bit more in the tank than she ultimately did, and now Sweet Melania is stretching out to the mile and a 16th, going an extra half furlong. I just feel like there's a limitation to this mare's stamina, and it might be exposed a little bit in this race. And I also just don't trust her because it seemed like her career was basically over in the middle of last year. I mean, her form had fallen apart, and I know Todd Fletcher got her back in form for that race at Gulfstream last time, but this is a tougher spot, and I'm just a little skeptical of her. I mean, the one horse that I would be most willing to upgrade coming out of the Swanee River is In a Hurry, because there wasn't a whole lot of closing going on from the back of the pack in that race, and she was the one that was finishing best of all at the end. She's just one of these Shug McGahee horses that, it's that cliche, just keeps getting to them to improve over time, and her PPs fit that model. She just keeps getting better. Her speed figures keep ticking up, and I think the distance is not going to be a problem for her, whereas I'm a little bit concerned about both Sweet Melania and Shifty She getting the extra half furlong. So I would definitely want to include In a Hurry, especially if she's anything near that 12-1 morning line. But Barry, I do like one of the horses that you mentioned, the number 5 Gift List. I agree. Her speed figures maybe are a little bit light compared to this field, but I like all of her races from last season. She closed into that slow pace in the Appalachian behind Jouster, who was in really good form at the time. She had that coming out performance in the Edgewood when she upset the heavy favorite Aunt Pearl that day, who didn't show up, but Gift List was a really impressive winner of that race. And then last time in the Wonder Again, that was one of those races where there was just no pace on, and Cone Lima got one of her many good trips last year, and Giftless was closing pretty well at the end of that race while kind of weaving in between horses going down to the inside. She's been off for a long time. I know the layoff is a bit of a concern, but Brian Lynch has decent numbers off layoffs, and I went on XBTV and watched that workout that you mentioned, that 57-1 from Palm Meadows back on January 14th, and I liked what I saw. She reeled in a workmate pretty easily after starting about 3 lengths behind that horse and finished on even terms, going better than the horse inside of her. So I feel like Gift List has really been asked for to gain some fitness in the morning coming into this race, and I don't know if we're going to get 15-1 on her. Maybe we will, because it does feel like Regal Glory has to take a lot of money in this race, but I'm very interested in Gift List as well.
Yeah, Giftless was the other horse I was going to use in here. I don't think there's any way we get 15-1, even with Regal Glory. I could see her easily being the third or fourth choice in this field. But for all the reasons you said, I mean, she was considered the top of her division last year. You mentioned she's light on speed figures, but those were spring 3-year-old figures. I would fully expect her, if she's back at the top of her game, to be able to increase those figures by a good 5, 6, 7, 8 points by this time. So I definitely think she is a contender in here if she's cranked up by Brian Lynch.
Now, Barry, we're going to talk a little bit more about ticket construction at the end of the podcast. But for a race like this, how would you look to approach it? Because it sounds like you want to try to beat Regal Glory. She is a horse that has some pretty convincing form coming into this race. So is she one that you would feel comfortable just kind of leaving off your tickets, or would you just try to spread a little bit and use her in tandem with some others?
She's one I'll have to pass because I think in the next race, actually, the two chalks look pretty decent. Unless I was thinking about playing kind of an all chalk kind of pick four, pick five, and then elevate the amount, which I haven't decided yet. But I think I'm not going to go that route, and I'll leave one of these favorites out because there's no point in playing an all chalk kind of pick five unless you're really going to pay for $4 or $5. But that's a decision later. But in this race, I'm tending to spread. I'm going to use Wakanaka as well. I watched that race, her last race over in Italy, and she won it pretty easy. I mean, I know the Italian competition doesn't really stack up, but she kind of can be any kind in here, and maybe we could get a price on her. I mean, there's so many different directions here. I just couldn't think about just kind of going with Regal Glory in there. I mean, even a horse like Bipartisanship, whose numbers have been elevating every race. If something wacky happens and this pace is as fast as it seems, that horse might have a shot also.
Yeah, I'm probably viewing this as a bit less of a spread race than the two of you are. I think Regal Glory is way the horse to beat. I think her tactical speed makes her very dangerous in this race. She figures to be post or sitting just off Shifty She in the early going, and I think she's simply a better horse than Shifty She. So I do respect Regal Glory, and for me, I would concentrate on just really pressing her and gift list in the pick five sequence and using some others like In a Hurry primarily, but she'd be my backup, and then maybe some others as very distant backups, maybe C's in an ABC type wager. But I did not view this as a big spread race because I was having trouble latching on to some of the other alternatives that you guys mentioned. I mean, Wakanaka, Barry, I agree about the visual impression of her last race. It's just I'm looking up the trainer stats for Bill Mott, and he has really poor numbers with foreign shippers, so that kind of bothered me a little bit. And Craig with Summer in Saratoga, I mean, again, I'm knocking horses that are going to be prices, so take it with a grain of salt. But I felt like the best race she put forth was that Dowager going a mile and a half two back, and I'm just not thrilled with her form over the conventional shorter route distances. But again, she's going to be a price in this race, so if you think that double-digit odds are fair odds on her, then definitely she's one that you could use in this sequence. But Barry, I think you made a good point about there being limited opportunities to find prices in this pick five sequence, because a lot of these races seem like, or I should say a few of these races seem like they really could chalk out, and that could be the case with the next race, race 10, the Fred W. Hooper grade 3 event going the one-turn mile. And I'll throw it back to you, Barry. It seems like the favorites have a pretty strong grasp on this race.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I didn't really get past Fearless and the 8 horse Speaker's Corner. They seem just way better than everybody else in this field. I mean, I think I tweeted out a while ago about Dennis's Moment. It was like any day is a good day when you get to bet against Dennis's Moment, and probably take some money here. The 6 horse Liam, I just wasn't impressed by that win in the $25,000 optional claimer last time. He's kind of getting out a little bit. It wasn't ideal, and I just think that it was really strange that this horse ended up here instead of a different spot, to be honest with you. And the rest of them are kind of also rans. And Fearless is 4 for 5 at Gulfstream, um, and just kind of runs his race every time, and he's ultra consistent. Should be a good race, but I think it's just going to chalk out.
Yeah, Craig. I mean, when I looked at this race, I was a little surprised by the morning line because I feel like Speaker's Corner is supposed to be a heavy favorite in this race just based on his recent efforts. I guess Fearless is going to take some money for the reason that Barry mentioned. He's got that Gulfstream record, and I mean, Todd Pletcher just seems to be winning with everything lately at Gulfstream Park, so I guess that'll attract some money in Fearless's direction. But I mean, Speaker's Corner especially, but both of these horses seem like they've got a big advantage, don't they?
Yeah, when you see Dennis's moment is the third choice on the morning line, it kind of, I mean, and what there's no way he's beating those two horses in my opinion. So if you bet on him, good luck. But for me, it's just those two, and of the two, I much prefer Speaker's Corner. I'm not sure the 1 turn mile is really what Fearless wants. He's been a little better around 2 turns in my opinion, and I actually think Speaker's Corner is really good. I mean, sometimes I have to remind myself I do make speed figures. And he just has faster races. His last two, he's run 125s. Fearless is a horse who has hit the 120 mark a couple times. He hasn't yet hit that this year. Maybe this third off the layoff would be his peak, but I still don't think his peak would be good enough. So of the two, I would definitely consider Speaker's Corner an A-type horse for me. Fearless more of a B, and if anybody else wins, I'm out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm almost disappointed that these two favorites are not in the Pegasus World Cup because in some ways they both belong in that race. Fearless because he just seems like the kind of horse that race needs to, maybe pick up the pieces from off the pace, whereas there are very few options to do that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But, I mean, Speaker's Corner, he's supposed to eventually be that kind of horse that can win the grade ones. I mean, seems like the kind of horse that if he continues progressing at the rate that he's been, could be in the conversation to win a race like the Met Mile later in the year. So, I mean, this seems like a perfect spot for him going the 1 turn mile at Gulfstream. And I agree. He just seems like way the horse to beat in this race, and I'm not going to try to go against him. And I agree with what Barry said about the horse that I think could be the third choice in this race, the number 6 Liam. I also was not thrilled with the visual impression of his last race, drifting out through the stretch. I don't agree with the comment geared down. I thought that Sias actually had to work pretty hard to get this horse clear of the runner-up in that race, Create Again, who's just an inferior horse to these. He's more of a claiming type. So I'm not viewing Liam as a real contender here. Dennis's moment, I mean, he should be like 15-1. I don't really see him taking much money in this race, nor do I view him as a contender. So, yeah, it was the favorites for me, leaning on Speaker's Corner with Fearless being the backup.
My one thought is I wonder if Liam's in here to maybe apply some pace pressure as also being from the Todd Pletcher barn. That was my only real concern, maybe to help Fearless. But it's just hard to say in these type situations what the plan is.
Let's move on to the penultimate race of this Pick 5 sequence, Race 11. It is the Pegasus World Cup Turf, going 1.125 miles on the turf course at Gulfstream. And this seems like one of the more wide open races that we're going to discuss as part of this sequence. And I do think we have to start the conversation with the two Todd Pletcher runners. Craig, we've got the defending champion in this race, Colonel Liam, who obviously we haven't seen in quite a while since a poor effort in the Manhattan last year. And we also have Todd Pletcher's other runner, the up-and-comer Never Surprised, who's drawn all the way in the outside post position, but he's coming into this race in kind of the same fashion that Colonel Liam was when he won it last year, so I think you have to develop an opinion about both of these horses.
Yeah, and this is, as you said, it's a sequence where it is a one that's tough to find prices. So for that reason, I'm not using Colonel Liam in here. I don't like the long layoff. Admittedly, he could easily win this race, but it's not going to be a big ticket for me. And I don't want to chalk out like Barry was talking about. So of the two Todd Pletchers, I much prefer Never Surprised. I just think he's in crazy good form right now. He just goes out to the front and he keeps going. He makes you come get him. And lately, nobody's been able to do that. The only times he seems to lose is when they don't let him run early. They kind of reel him in and rate him. And it seems like they figured out that doesn't work with him. So I expect Luis Saez just to go out and go fast and make the others come catch him. The one thing I will definitely say for sure is he pretty much spells doom for the other speed horses in here. I know TimeformUS, the pace projector, has it as a fast pace, and I think he alone is going to make sure that's a reality. But some other horses in here that like the front end, like Doswell, who's all his wins have come in wire-to-wire fashion. A horse like Field Pass, who's done his best running up near the front. I think they're in trouble because of his presence. So I'm going to use a couple others, more closer type horses. I'll start with Chad Brown's horse, Sacred Life. I think he's one that might get overlooked in here. And if things get hot up here, he's a really consistent horse. Always runs right around those 120 TimeformUS speed figures. So I think he could just trip out if Never Surprised. Maybe can't see out the 1.125 in this better competition that he's been facing. And another I like, and I found it really crazy when I looked through his past performances, is Hit the Road. He's a horse who's run basically one flat mile every single time he's been on turf. But I just don't see any reason he couldn't get the 1.125. I think he's been up against it in California the last few times out when there just hasn't been a lot of pace in races where Mo Forza was in them. And Mo Forza's a really good horse. He just isn't quite as good as him. But Mo Forza's not in here. And I think if the pace does get hot and Never Surprised can't see it out, Hit the Road will be one that would be running at the end as well.
Barry, how'd you view this one?
Yeah, this one is to me a really good spread race. My top pick ends up being the 2 Atone, and I'll read you what my notes have, especially from the last race, the Fort Lauderdale. 4 wide on the first turn, 4 wide on the far turn, ran a well, and looked what to be a slow pace. The only concern for me would be if that was the time. That was the horse's best shot. That's my only concern about this horse. But as far as the others, the 12 Never Surprised. Basically, this whole race changed complexion once that horse drew the 12 spot. And it kind of opened things up for horses like Flavius, who might end up getting a better trip, who I'm very interested in. I'm kind of against Space Traveler and Hit the Road. I just have no affinity for any California horses coming east. It just never works out for whatever reason. Mo Forza did it a couple years back in this race here and just didn't show up. It was just a no-show. I just think some of that form out there is pretty weak when they come east. A little bit different when East Coasters go out west. It's their home court, but I just don't like that. Colonel Liam is really an enigma, and I'm not willing to take a short price on a horse like this, who kind of got good in the middle of the year last year and then tailed off. I mean, he's eligible to come back running, but at a short price, I'm just not into it.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm the one that's going to be eating the chalk on this show because I like Never Surprised a lot in this race. I think he probably is going to be favored over Colonel Liam. It just feels like the momentum is really going in Never Surprised directions coming into this race, and I think it should. I mean, as Craig was saying, his last couple races have just been stellar. I mean, I know he hasn't been beating the type of competition that he's facing here, but I mean, he is running the kind of turf races that should be putting him in the mix in Grade 1 company for the entirety of his 4-year-old season, and I do think he's ultimately going to be better going a flat mile. He just seems like the kind of horse that's built for that 1 mile distance. But, the fast pace that's predicted on the pace projector for this race, I think it could come to fruition just because of Never Surprised nature. He's a horse that doesn't like to go slow on the front end. He likes to set some honest fractions, but I don't think there's any other speed in this race. I mean, Flavius is shown second on the pace projector, and let's be honest, I mean, Flavius, he sets the pace when there's nobody else that wants to do it. He's really not that fast. And the number 10, Channel Cat, I guess he's the other horse that you could say is a potential frontrunner, but he's never gotten a sniff of the lead in conventional route races going a shorter distance than like 1 3/8 or 1.5 miles. I mean, he's only on the lead when they're going basically 50 to the half mile. So Never Surprised, I think, is totally loose in this race, probably setting some honest fractions in doing so, but that's the way that he likes to run. I'm not concerned at all about the 12 post because there's a long run to the first turn. Louis Size is an aggressive rider. He's going to ensure this horse has plenty of time to clear the field, and I don't think he's going to have any problem doing that. They learned early in this horse's career that you do not mess around with rating him. You just let him roll on the front end the way that he wants to, and I think he's probably going to do what he did last time, open up 3 lengths on the far turn and Good luck to this field catching him. I think he's coming into this race in better form than Colonel Liam was when he won that Tropical Park Derby and parlayed that into a Pegasus win last year. And I just like never surprised. It's going to be really tough to reel in this race. I do agree with you guys about the interesting horses that I would use as backups. I think you all made good points about, especially Barry with the tone. I fully agree with what you said about this horse. He's 20-1 in the morning line. I don't know what kind of price he will be, but of the Mike Maker runners, I'm most interested in him. I think you made good points about his trip in the Fort Lauderdale, and I just love when these Mike Maker horses seem like they get into good form and start overachieving, accomplishing better things than you ever thought them capable of, because Mike Maker usually keeps these horses in good form once they start running those types of races. So I like a tone. Craig, I'm not against Hit the Road at all. I think he's a contender in this race, and I also think that the number 9 Field Pass, he's kind of one of these horses that you have to separate from Sacred Life. They're coming out of a couple of the same races, but I think that Field Pass could be sitting in a pretty good spot in here, probably stalking Never Surprised, maybe in that second flight, and he gets the distance and usually shows up with an honest effort. So I would use them as backups, but I'm pretty bullish on the chances of Never Surprised here.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not tossing Never Surprised at all. He's definitely an A for me. I'm tossing Colonel Liam, another one. I mean, it's kind of that sequence that you said you have to make a stand somewhere. I think this is one, Barry kind of hinted at it, where if you really think it's, not necessarily all favorites, but you're not getting any bombs in here, there's nothing that says you only have to hit it for 50 cents. So it's going to be one after scratches. It's going to be an interesting ticket to make, I think.
Let's move on to the final race of this Pick 5 sequence and the headline attraction on Saturday at Gulfstream Park, the Pegasus World Cup Invitational, going 1 1/8 miles. There are 9 horses signed on. 9 horses will enter the starting gate, but essentially, this is just a classic match race between 2 exceptional horses, Knicks Go and Life is Good. Barry, I think that there are two ways to approach this race from a discussion standpoint. One is from a wagering perspective. I mean, do you want to use both of these horses? Do you want to bet on one? And the other is just from a tactical standpoint. How do you think this race is going to be run and how it's going to affect the two? So talk a little bit about both of those, how you think you want to approach this race from a wagering standpoint and how you think it's going to play out from a trip standpoint.
Yeah, from a wagering standpoint, I mean, including both those 2 horses, would be the prudent thing. But I don't know. I really think the way this race is going to shape up is going to determine a lot of things about the order of finish, and I'm not so sold on Knicks Go kind of hanging around. And I know that sounds blasphemous and speed figure wise and everything that surrounding this race. I mean, he was just named best horse in the world, but the times that he got headed and horses saw his face, he kind of backed up a little bit and he didn't fight on. And that's concerning to me with a horse who looks on paper and visually to be much faster in Life is Good. And if Life is Good gets to the front or is face to face with Knicks Go, I think Knicks Go is in trouble. And there is a situation where he can just kind of drop back and even finish third. He did it when he was in the Saudi Cup and in the Met Mile. Granted, those were one-turn races, but still, that's 2 documented cases of where he just didn't fight on. And I would be definitely treading lightly with a horse like that, with a horse as fast as Life is Good in this race.
Craig, how are you looking at the pace situation here?
I totally agree with Barry. Of the 2 horses, I think Life is Good is faster. Everything he's done in his career, I just don't know how you can outrun him for the lead. We saw him outrun Jackie's Warrior for the early lead in the sprint race in that Jerkins Memorial. And that race had crazy fast fractions. So I just don't see Knicks Go winning this race, personally. Does that mean Life is Good has to win? Not necessarily, but I think he should be the overwhelming favorite in here. He's the guy that, if I'm playing the Pick 5, I'm probably just going to single Life's Good and move on. Now, as a vertical player, I'm going to try to take advantage of the fact that Barry alluded to, that I don't think Knicks Go is going to stick around for second. I mean, when he gets headed, he's got some ugly lines in his past performances. You have to search him out because it's been a while, but in Saudi it happened. He didn't run I mean, I guess you could say he ran okay. He fought a really good horse in Charlatan, but he packs it in, and that's just the times he doesn't make the front, he's nowhere to be found. So I'm going to use a couple others in exactas, more so with Life is Good on top, but in maybe one of them, they're going to be much bigger prices, so I'm not going to get beat if they're able to get up to beat them. And the two I'll use are Stiletto Boy, who I just think seems to run his race every single time. Interesting note, he actually was winning the Iowa Derby on the same night that Nick Sko ran his best Timeform US speed figure at Prairie Meadows. And he's done nothing but get better ever since. He runs low 120th Timeform US speed figures. And that's just much better than what anybody else in this field really can do, especially on dirt. The other horse I would use, and it's because we haven't seen much of him on dirt lately, is Sir Winston. I mean, we're talking about a Belmont Stakes winner. He's been running up in Canada on the synthetic. Seems to have regained his best form, and he's going to be a price as well. So I'm going to use those two in second, slightly more. Use them a little bit in first over top of Life is Good, and maybe a real small exacta box with those two together. But my opinion as a vertical bettor is just to toss Nick Sko because I think he's in real trouble here.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here because I think that that's the general consensus opinion that Life is Good is just much faster than Nick Sko. And based on the recent races, that's true. The numbers do bear that out. But let's say that the version of Nick Sko that we saw in the 2020 Dirt Mile shows up in this race and still has that kind of speed. Because let's remember, in that 2020 Dirt Mile, Nick Sko set a faster pace, Craig, based on your numbers, than Life is Good did in his Dirt Mile a year later. And Nick Sko outran a really fast horse in complexity to the first turn that day. I mean, if you watch that race, Joel Rosario had to really hustle him to do so. I mean, he was coming out of the gate, I think, tapping him with a whip a couple times to get to the front end. But Nick Sko, he did at one time have that kind of speed to out-hustle a very fast horse into the first turn. Do you think he's just lost that speed, or has he not had to use it recently? I don't really have the answer to that, but I feel like Nick Sko, and I'm saying this about the morning line favorite. We'll see who actually is favorite. I think it'll be close, but I think he's a little bit underestimated from a pace standpoint coming into this race. And the fact that he's drawn the rail, I think that Rosario is going to be looking to ride him the same way that he did in that Dirt Mile and get to the front end, because I feel like these jockeys have to know the importance of securing the early lead in these races where your only other major competition is a speed to your outside.
Yeah, I think he's going to try. My opinion is I think horses' speed get dulled a little bit when they're running in these longer route races, which he has been. 1.25 miles, 1.125. He just hasn't been running this short, whereas Life is Good has. He ran sprints, he ran the couple mile races, and I just think he'll be a little bit sharper, and I do think he's just a faster horse. Even if Nick Sko hasn't lost his speed, just everything I've seen going way back to the 3-year-old season of Life is Good tells me he's a horse who just can outrun whatever you put in front of him early. I agree, Nick Sko, the rail is probably the best spot for him because I wouldn't want him to have to clear Life is Good. Maybe Joel can just really gun him out of there and kind of get Irad Ortiz, who's not often the most aggressive speed rider, to just kind of sit off his flank. But I think that would be a mistake. I think he really should take it to him. I think he's the faster horse. He's the newly turned 4-year-old as opposed to Nick Sko, who's now 6 and maybe, tailing. Obviously, his speed figures don't say he's tailing off, but he's certainly reached his peak. And at some point, he's going to start heading on the downside. So I understand all of your points. My eyes tell me that Life is Good is a faster horse.
Yeah, I think I'm most interested to see what Irad does with Life is Good, because I feel like I know Joel is going to be hustling Nick Sko. I mean, the rail draw basically, dictates what their plan is. But with Life is Good, I'll be interested to see if Irad is intent on opening up an advantage or if he's content to just sit alongside Nick Sko. Because one thing we know about Life is Good is that he doesn't really like to sit alongside another horse. He tends to get very rank when that happens. He doesn't even work in company with other horses in the morning because he typically doesn't handle it that well. So I'll be interested to see what Irad does with this horse coming out of the starting gate. But, Barry, Craig mentioned a couple of other alternatives to maybe get in there for second or to use underneath. Did you view it as a race where you might be able to beat one of the favorites in vertical bets, or even for the horizontals like a pick five? Is there anybody else that you want to use as a backup?
Sure, absolutely. And it's funny because they're two totally opposite horses than Craig mentioned. I think Title Ready has a little bit of back class to kind of finish up strong. Dallas Stewart has a history of finishing runner-ups in these kind of races where, at a big price. I just hope he's not bet. But I don't think anybody's going to be bet besides the top two. Sir Winston, I just couldn't get to because his Belmont, he beat Tacitus, who can't beat anybody, and a horse still the longest shot on the board, morning line wise. Commandeer actually, I think, has a little bit of upside here, and could best the rest of these horses. I mean, who knows what it's going to be like behind those top two, and as the longest price on the board, you can't count him out because it's just so jumbled up behind them. So I'll give him a chance also.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I agree with Craig on Stiletto Boy. I think he's the one that could get in there for third, at the least, and maybe do better than that if one of the favorites really does fall apart after a speed duel. But Stiletto Boy, he's just an overachiever who continues to improve, and I think still has upside, turning 4 now. So he's one that I could see getting in there. For me, even Sir Winston, who I've had a love affair with in the past, I think some of the others are a little bit of a stretch, and the favorites would really have to have something go wrong or have a crazy pace situation for any of them to beat them. But we'll see. It's certainly possible that could happen. Before we wrap it up, guys, just want to throw it back to each of you and talk a little bit about how you might construct your tickets. I know we've mentioned a little bit along the way, but just kind of do a brief recap of how you're looking to approach this sequence. Barry, I'll start with you.
Well, I mean, I think we pinpointed it that the races the turf races seem to be where the spreading will happen. The first race of the sequence, the 8th, I'm probably going to go about 3 deep with Pacific Gale, 4 Graces, and just one time, kind of not willingly, but probably throw in there. The Philly and Mare Turf Invitational, I'm definitely spreading, not using Sweet Melania or Shifty She. Then the 10th race, which is the Hooper, it looks like Fearless and Speaker's Corner only. Then we're going to spread again in the 11th race, which is the Invitational for the males. So we're going with the 2, 3, what was it, 9, 10. I'm going to throw in Channel Cat and then not use Colonel Liam or Never Surprised. And then most likely I'm going to single Life is Good in the end.
Craig, how about you?
Yeah, I'm going to spread a little bit in the first leg using 4 Graces, Pacific Gale, Jakarta a little bit, and Just One Time. Just mostly trying to get through that leg. Then in the Philly and Mare Turf, or the Pegasus Philly and Mare Turf, I guess it is, I'm going to use Summer at Saratoga and Regal Glory as A's. Then I'm not sure if I'll have any B's in there. I'm trying to remember. Gift list. Definitely will have gift list on my ticket as well. The Hooper, I'm going to lean really heavily on Speaker's Corner with just a dash of Fearless. If anybody else wins, I will be definitely knocked out of that one. In the Pegasus, I'm going to use Never Surprised as an A. I'm also going to use Sacred Life and Hit the Road more as B types. And then in the last race, I'm definitely going to single Life is Good. No matter, even if stuff changes in the earlier legs due to scratches, I'm just playing Life is Good in the pick 5. But vertically, I'll use some Stiletto Boy and Sir Winston with Life is Good.
Unfortunately, I think I'm putting together the chalkiest ticket of the three of us. But in race 8, I like Pacific Gale. I would use her in tandem with both Jakarta and Just One Time. I respect both of those favorites. I would use the horse that Barry mentioned, 4 Graces, as a backup in the 9th race. I would primarily focus on Regal Glory and Gift List. I have trouble just leaving out Regal Glory because I really do think she has way the worst to beat in this race, but I think the value does lie with Gift List, and I would also use In a Hurry as a backup in race 10. The Hooper, I'm mostly on Speaker's Corner. I want the majority of my play going through him. I do prefer him to Fearless, but I would use Fearless as a backup. Nobody else in that race. In the Pegasus Turf, I'd lean most heavily on Never Surprised, with some of the others that we mentioned earlier as backups, the 2, 5, and 9, Field Pass, Hit the Road, and especially Atone. Maybe even Space Traveler and Sacred Life as more distant backups if I'm right in the other legs. And in the Pegasus, the final leg, I would use Knicks Go and Life is Good and Equal Strength. I have a really tough time separating the two. I'm not viewing this as an appealing wagering race in the slightest sense, so I'm just looking to appreciate it as a fan, and I'm going to go the logical route in that race, and I would make Stiletto Boy a C. He'd be a very distant backup for me. So hopefully that's some helpful insight for you guys to attack the sequence. Barry, I want to give a big thank you to you for coming on the podcast. Great insights.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure. I love working with everyone at the Daily Race Forum. I've got some history there when I did the ad campaign for the tournaments back in the day. So it's a good relationship. I love the products. I love Timeform. I mean, I use everything. So it's great to be on.
Yeah, great to have you, Barry, and look forward to meeting you at the Florida Derby. I do want to throw in, you guys talked me into Atone. I'm definitely going to use him on my tickets as well.
Thanks for coming on, Barry. Craig, we'll be back on Tuesday to recap all of these races. I'm sure we'll have an in-depth discussion of the Pegasus. Hopefully these races live up to the way that they look like they're going to shape out on paper. So hopefully there's going to be a lot to discuss when we do that TimeformUS Pacecast on Tuesday. Remember, you can listen to these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS Pacecast coming up on Tuesday.